We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with Liberty Nation's national security correspondent, Mr. Dave Patterson. Now, early in the show, we've been talking all the facets of the Israel situation. There's just a couple more data points that I'd like to go over, Dave, if I may. The first one has to be that in 1979, Iranian terrorists, they held American hostages. I think it was slightly more than 50 hostages, and they held them for 444 days. Now, that was really a bitter humiliation, I think, for America in general and for President Carter specifically. Now, we know that at the time that we're recording this, Dave, that there are at least 14 U.S. hostages being held amongst the scores of others. Now, do you see, bearing 1979 in mind, do you see their release or delayed release being used to further demoralize the U.S. and specifically to embarrass U.S. leadership?
I think that actually there were 14 Americans killed during the invasion of the murderers, and there may be as many as 20, if not slightly more, Americans being held hostage, or Israeli-American dual citizenship being held hostage. But to your point, this is the Achilles heel of any government, because your citizens are your cherished equity, and to see them in these kinds of circumstances is extremely difficult for governments to deal with. Carter found this out, and unwilling to do really what was necessary to do. I mean, he had that botched rescue attempt that cost
8 servicemen dead
Yes.
in the helicopter.
I mean, that was just ridiculous. I mean, the backstory on it is pathetic in how it was planned and what they did at the very last minute, and it's ridiculous. But it goes to a point where your citizens are going to demand that you do something, and when you look at the alternatives, there are very few things that you can actually do.
Yeah.
You can go in and you can capture and hold your own hostages, and now you have a quid pro quo in the hostage negotiations. But in this case, I think that what's going to happen is that the United States, working very closely with the IDF, is going to work to fix this problem one way or the other, and to make an attempt to get the hostages back. I trust that they'll be clever and creative enough to be successful. If history is any indicator, it's going to be very difficult, because Israel is determined to ensure that Hamas no longer exists in this world, and rightly so.
Yeah, I think that nobody is going to be willing to let this drag on for the 444 days that it happened. I mean, it was an error on Jimmy Carter's part to let that carry on. But hindsight is always 2020. Now, something I always want to get into, Dave, is we talk a lot about the international response to things nowadays. Whenever we're dealing with global affairs, our governments tend to talk about what the international response is, what the global response. And in my mind, I always hear the word the globalist response, the globalist response. And we've had we've had responses, and I want to go through a couple with you and get your take on them. So first off, there's NATO. Now, NATO has been a very united front when it comes to Ukraine, but with Israel, we have a Turkish minister, I believe it's the Minister of Education. Now, Turkey is obviously a member of NATO, saying that Prime Minister Netanyahu will one day be shot and die for what he's engaging in now. And now, how do we really square the circle that NATO can have any useful involvement in the situation when NATO members are essentially backing Hamas?
I think that that's a real problem for NATO. It's a problem for any globalist organization where the good of the few is also the good of the many, and they have a problem. No one has been willing to put the Erdogan government on notice within NATO. Nobody has been willing to do anything economically in terms of sanctions toward Turkey because of its NATO membership. But since Erdogan has become the leader of Turkey, Turkey has basically issued all of the values, except when it's in their interest of NATO. And I think that people need to start to counsel Turkey on its behavior. On the other hand, you have to come to a conclusion at some point that the people who gather at Davos and Aspen don't have the people of the United States interests at heart. They have some notion of a globalist hegemony, and it is not consistent with the populism within the United States, nor is it consistent with the way the United States sees itself, not the Biden administration, but those who have a good view of the way that the United States has conducted itself over its history in terms of the rest of the world, and with some few exceptions, I believe that the United States has been an overall power for good in the world, and it's been an exceptional nation, and that exceptionalism has not had anything to do with elite thinkers in Davos.
True enough. Yeah, sometimes strange bedfellows need to get separate hotel rooms, I think, Dave. Now, America, she's committed to supplying and supporting two wars now, two major conflicts on foreign soil. And I get the arguments, it bolsters national security to have wars fought overseas rather than on your home turf. But I do wonder how much the American public, and in fact, let's be fair, most of the Western world can really take economically, spiritually, and emotionally. How much more of this fighting on two fronts can the West take, Dave?
Well, I think that you make a very good point, Mark. I think that there is going to be a significant stress emotionally, economically, and from a leadership perspective as well. And that stress could be mitigated somewhat if the United States had a leadership in which the American people could have confidence. But everything that takes place from a perspective of U.S. leadership has to be seen through the lens of the debacle of the Afghanistan withdrawal. And people can say, yes, but that was back in 2021. I'm sorry, everybody. That's how they think of this administration and this national security team. And so there has to be leadership will sustain a lot of pain. It certainly did during World War II, but this dearth of leadership that the United States has now is just simply going to make the economic pain seem more intense. And if Biden wanted to free up some money, he could certainly get rid of this climate change crap and all the money that's being spent in trying to get people to do things to accommodate a fiction of climate change.
Advice from Dave Patterson, hopefully straight to the ears of President Joe Biden. Dave Patterson, thank you ever so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Mark. Always good to be with you.
And that's all we have time for on this week's special edition of Liberty Nation Radio right here on the Radio America Network. My thanks to Dave Patterson for his insight and thoughts, and to you at home for joining us. Let's all hope that peace awaits us in the very near future. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.